So let's move on to, you said that this is not a one-time test. So how many times a year is the student actually sat down at the table, given the same set of papers, given the opportunity to make his or her markings, and then the teacher later on, not grades, but determines whether they meet the state eligibility? How many times does that happen a year?
It happens across 3 days for ELA in January and across 3 days for math in March.
Just because
now, let me be clear. That's for ELA and for math in grades 3 through 8. In grades 9 through 12, the students across the range of time they're in high school sit for Regents tests in Math A, sometimes Math B, English Language Arts, Global History, American History, and a series of science tests. It's a multi-day test. Nonetheless, it's a series of tests, yes, in high school.
Whether you call it a series of tests, unless you're giving the student the same opportunity to be measured on the same skill, it's still just one test. You just have one test for a few days covering a variety of subjects, but it's still one opportunity to demonstrate whether or not they have met the state requirements and what grade they get for that.
Okay, so the answer is that hundreds of students do that in each school. And so whatever it is true that one student is being measured across that range of skills, it's a very
only once a year.
It's actually twice a year in elementary, middle, and it's 5 times across high school, given that, or actually more, given the different...
On the same exact item?
I'm sorry.
Excuse me, sir. Ladies and gents, please, you're interrupting the hearing process. As far as the dialogue, please do not yell out, scream out, please. If you disagree, when you disagree, come up and give testimony and make reference to your disagreement during your testimony. Councilmember Liu, Mr. Liebman, I want to make it very clear. You should just excuse me if I'm wrong. I do not believe that you're testing students more than once a year for the same skills. You're saying to us, the tests happen over a period of days. You're now claiming that they take place twice a year. Are they the same test that's being administered twice a year? Yes or no? Is it the same test?
No.
Then why would you even try to obfuscate the matter?
I didn't try to obfuscate.
You are absolutely trying to obfuscate. In fact, this whole thing is an obfuscation.
All right. What I said was, no. If you're going to say now, please, just let me answer the question. May I, Chair?
1 second, please.
Thank you.
Let me allow John, you finish your point and let Mr. Liebman answer. Let me just say to both of you, I have to, you've been at this question since 10 exactly now, 12 minutes on this question, which you can't remember, and I have to move the agenda. But Mr. John, are you finished asking your question so he can respond? Good. You definitely have the opportunity to respond, not a doubt. But I can't have you both crisscrossing each other, because I can't understand. I appreciate it. My question was responded with a very simple answer. Okay, what was your question, Councilman? My first question was, we started to talk about, I'm trying to get at whether, in fact, the test actually happens once a year, which I believe it does. A specific skill, whether it's a subset of a skill within English language arts, or a subset of a skill within math. That's only tested once a year, and that is a single measure that goes into this entire concocted system. Meanwhile, Mr. Liebman keeps trying to say, well, it's not a test, it's a series of assessments. It's a series of assessments going over a few days, and now he started to say that for elementary and middle schools, it's done twice a year, and for high schools, it's done 5 times a year. When in fact, and that is only trying to imply that the assessment for that particular skill is actually taking place multiple times a year, when in fact, I do not believe it to be the case. So if Mr. Liebman would simply answer the simple question, when students are assessed on these critical skills based on state standards of whether they're passing or failing, moving from level 2, level 3, level 4, level 1, how many times are they actually being assessed with that skill per year? Okay. Get it, Mr. Liebman?
Now that you put the question that way, The answer is that they are assessed on each of the skills through multiple items on one series of assessments that take place in ELA for grades 3 through 8 in January over the course of 3 days, in math over 3 days that take place in March, and in high school over the course of the various days on which they take Regents examinations in the various subject matters. Each one of those tests, however, has multiple items and approaches to assessing each of those skills. And so any statistician or other person would say, who's looking at them, you have multiple observations on that occasion or those occasions of how the student can perform on those skills. Sometimes they're answering a multiple choice question. Sometimes they're actually asked to go through the calculation and write it down. On ELA, sometimes they write a short answer, sometimes it's a paragraph, and sometimes it's an answer to a question. So there are multiple ways during those periods that I just described for getting at the same different set of skills that are combined for each of the grade levels. Now, it's important to point out that these are the standards that the public of the state of New York, through its representatives in Albany, have identified as the standards that a child needs to be proficient on in those subject matters. So these aren't
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Liebman is no longer addressing my question, so I think we need to. And I understand what Mr. Liebman is getting at. I don't dispute that at all. I won't ask any more questions because of a matter of time, but let me say this to you, to the Department of Education. Mr. Liebman, don't take this personally. What you have confirmed really is that the testing process does actually happen only once a year. No matter how you couch it in terms of all these different phrases, the student is actually assessed just once a year. It may take place over a few days, no question about it, but it's still an assessment that is taking place once a year. It is therefore at a very high stake examination. You talk about the standards that are promulgated at the state level. You know, what happened to the days where the teacher was actually given the charge of instructing the kids, and you'd have a quiz every week or 2 or 3 times a year, and that ultimately goes into determining what the grade and the performance and the progress of the students actually is. You're taking away that instructional ability from the teachers and putting it into this robotic system that you've created. And, you know, the worst thing about this is that there are other measures where the department actually has the ability to control. And it's not just based on these one-time statistics. For example, school environment. There doesn't seem to be any measure about overcrowding in the schools, about whether there's metal detectors at that school, whether it's been designated in impacts. All of those criteria, you're not factoring into how you determine whether a school gets an A, B, C, D, and or that.
May I respond just briefly?
Sure. Mr. Liebman, briefly, I have to move to my colleague.
All I will say, one sentence. Every single one of the criteria that you mentioned is measured in the school environment surveys, which are part of the progress report.
Thank you. Our colleague, Jimmy Backer, from